Hello, friends. We are very interested to know which cities you are listening to us from, so quickly like and write in the comments where you are from. Also share what shocking stories happened in your city or maybe even with you personally. Subscribe because the next story could be about your city or even your personal drama. Now let's dive into a new exciting story. April light filtered through the oak trees, casting dappled shadows on the Harper's brick home in suburban Connecticut. It was a house that screamed stability, red brick, white shutters, a neatly manicured lawn that Rich Harper mowed every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. sharp. At 52, Rich was a man you could trust, whether it was managing pension funds or giving an honest handshake. A financial advisor with a corner office at Pinnacle Wealth Management, he wore pressed trousers and a calm, measured manner that put clients and neighbors at ease. But underneath this shell lay fatigue, quiet wear and tear from years of routine, from the need to always be a support. Rich parked his Audi in the driveway at 6:42 p.m. as usual. He loosened his tie, picked up his leather briefcase, and walked out, gravel crunching under his polished shoes. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and a neighbor's barbecue. He stopped, looking at the house. Something was wrong. The kitchen lights were on, but the usual hum of NPR or Ellen's usually off-key crooning could not be heard. He brushed off the feeling, chalking it up to the long day. Tax season had just ended, and his brain was still sorting out spreadsheets. Inside, in the hallway, there was silence such that it pressed on the ears. He placed the keys on the console table, next to the frame where he and Ellen and the twins, Mia and Ethan, had smiled at their graduation last June. Both children were now attending the University of Connecticut, their upstairs bedrooms gathering dust. Without them, the house seemed larger, as if it was holding its breath. "Ellen," he called, his voice echoing down the stairs. There was no answer. He frowned, kicked off his shoes, and walked into the kitchen. The countertops were immaculate, no sign of dinner preparation. Ellen was usually already cooking something, maybe a roast or her signature meatloaf. Today, nothing. My stomach tightened, not from hunger, but from a vague feeling of wrongness. He walked up the stairs, the fifth step creaking under his weight. The bedroom door was ajar, and he pushed it open, expecting to see Ellen dozing or reading one of her self-help books. Instead, he froze. Ellen stood at the foot of their large bed, folding a sweater into an open suitcase. Her movements were clear, almost mechanical, as if she was getting ready to go on a business trip. But the suitcase was two full jeans, blouses, a pair of hiking boots she hadn't worn in years. Her gray-brown hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and her face was flushed, as if she was in a hurry. "Ellen, what's going on?" Rich's voice sounded harsher than he intended, the briefcase still dangling in his hand. She didn't immediately look up. She just smoothed out the sweater with both hands, pressing it. When she finally looked at him, there was something unfamiliar in her eyes, determination, or maybe challenge. "Rich, we need to talk," she said, her voice even but quieter than usual. "Talk? You are packing your suitcase. Where are you going?" He put down his briefcase, his heart beating faster. He crossed his arms, instinctively preparing for a blow, not understanding what was happening. Ellen exhaled, long and slow, as if she was releasing a breath she had been holding for years. "I'm going to Vermont. There's a retreat there. Female, meditation, yoga, all that." She paused, then added, "I need a break." "Break?" He repeated the word, tasting it as if it were a foreign language. A break from what? His tone remained under control, but there was an edge to it, a crack in his usual calm. She zipped up her suitcase, the sound sharp in the silence of the room. "From everything Rich. From this." She waved her hand vaguely at the room, the house, their life. "The children have left. The house is empty. I'm empty. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not just Mom or your wife or the one who keeps track of the accounts." Rich looked at her, his jaw clenched. He'd heard conversations like this before, usually in snatches after an extra glass of wine at dinner parties, when Ellen would become pensive, talking about discovering herself. He always brushed it off, considering it a phase, something that she would outgrow. But this was different. The suitcase made everything real. "So you're just leaving?" he asked, stepping closer. "You don't talk to me, don't warn me, just pack your things and leave? That's how it is now, right?" "I tried to talk," she snapped, her voice getting louder for the first time. "For months, Rich. I said it was hard for me." She said that I felt like I was disappearing. You nodded, said, "Aha," and went back to your laptop. "You didn't hear me." He opened his mouth to protest, but stopped himself. Did she speak? He remembered vague conversations, her sighs over coffee, how she said that she felt out of place. He thought it was menopause or the children leaving, something temporary. He suggested she sign up for courses, maybe join a book club. Isn't it? Memories were blurry, drowned out by client meetings and market reports. "Ellen, this is our life," he said, lowering his voice, almost pleading. "We built this. 30 years, children, house, everything. And now you. What, are you bored? Do you want to go find yourself in some hippie commune in Vermont?" "This is not a commune," she rolled her eyes. "This is a retreat. 8 weeks. I need space to think." 8 weeks? His voice broke, and he hated it, hated how it revealed the pain in his chest. "Are you leaving me here for 2 months because you need space? So what am I supposed to do? Just sit and wait?" She turned away, her hands clenching the handle of her suitcase. "I don't know, Rich. I don't know what you should do. I just know that I can't stay here. I'm suffocating." This word hit him like a slap in the face. "I'm suffocating." He gave her everything: a stable home, a good life, vacations in Aruba, college funds for her children. He worked 60 hours a week, missing fishing trips with Tom so he could be home for birthdays and anniversaries. And now she was suffocating. He turned away, running a hand through his thinning hair, trying to keep his anger from escaping. "You know what? Fine. Go. Look for your soul or whatever you need, but don't expect me to, applaud you for abandoning us." "I'm not quitting," she said, her voice now shaking. "I'm trying to save myself. Don't you understand? I don't want to wake up in 10 years and hate you because I still haven't figured out who I am." He laughed, short, bitterly. "Save yourself. It's strong. You're not the one who kept this family together, Ellen. It's me. I'm the one who shows up every damn day." Her eyes sparkled, and for a moment he thought she would cry. But she didn't cry. She straightened up, pulling her suitcase off the bed. "I'm not going to argue with you, Rich. I have already decided." She dragged her suitcase towards the door, her steps heavy on the wooden floor. Rich stood rooted to the spot, his mind racing between rage and disbelief. He wanted to grab her, shake her, force her to explain how she could do this. But his pride, the same pride that forced him to get up at 5 a.m. to run 5 kilometers, that kept his back straight at his father's funeral, would not allow him to beg. "When are you leaving?" he asked finally. His voice was cold, almost alien. "Tonight," she answered without turning around. "Bus at 9. "Today," he repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. He watched her walk down the stairs, her suitcase clattering on the steps. The door slammed downstairs, and he heard her loading things into the trunk of her old Subaru. He walked to the window, watching her get into the car. Their eyes met through the glass, and for a second he thought she was hesitating. But then she turned away, started the engine, and drove out onto the road. Rich remained standing on the threshold, his hands clenched into fists. "Do what you want," he said into the void. His voice was firm, but something cracked inside. "But I won't wait forever." He closed the door, and the silence of the house covered him like a cold blanket. A week passed, and the Harper house was a shell of what it once was. Without Ellen, without the hubbub of the twins, without the usual rhythm of family life, he became too big, too quiet. The kitchen lights, which Rich now turned on only when necessary, reflected off the polished countertops, emphasizing their emptiness. Even the smells were gone: no more morning coffee, no more Ellen's herbal tea, no more of her experimenting with new recipes. Just the faint aroma of the detergent the cleaning lady used to mop the floors on Wednesdays. Rich Harper, 52, still woke up at 5 a.m., ran his 5K, put on a suit and drove to the office as if nothing had changed. But something smoldered inside him, resentment, bitter and heavy, like raw coal. Monday morning started as usual. Rich sat at the kitchen island, drinking black coffee and scrolling through financial reports on his tablet. His gaze kept falling on the empty seat opposite where Ellen used to sit, buried in her phone or a book. Now there was only a salt pan, which she forgot to remove. He reached out to her, but stopped. "To hell with it," he muttered, turning back to the screen. He had a meeting with a major client at the office today, and he wasn't about to let personal matters get him down. At Pinnacle Wealth Management, everything was business as usual. Colleagues greeted each other, joked about the weather, and discussed the latest Yankees game. Rich answered briefly, with a slight smile, but stayed a little further away than usual. He felt their gazes not obvious, but tangible, like a light draft. Rumors have already spread. On Friday, at lunch in the cafeteria, he overheard his assistant Linda whisper to someone, "They say Ellen has left. I just took it and left." Rich pretended not to hear, but the words stuck in his head like a thorn. "Hey, Rich, are you okay?" asked Tom Kelly, his old friend and colleague, looking into the office closer to lunch. Tom was one of those who always spoke directly, but with warmth, balding, with a beer belly, and an eternal habit of fiddling with his wedding ring. "Okay," Rich replied without looking up from the monitor. "It's just a lot of work." Tom leaned against the door frame, crossing his arms. "Well, if something, well, I don't know, happened, you can tell. We are not strangers." Rich looked up, his eyes calm but firm. "Nothing happened, Tom. Everything is fine." He emphasized the last word, as if putting an end to it. Tom nodded but didn't leave. Okay. Just Marge saw Ellen's Instagram post. Something about Vermont, mountains, yoga. Looks like she's in heaven there. Rich felt the blood rush to his cheeks. He hasn't been on social media since Ellen left, but her posts have apparently already become a topic of discussion. "She does what she wants," he said, his voice level, but his fingers tightened on the handle. "It's her choice." Tom raised his hands in surrender. Got it. I'm not climbing. Just, if you want a beer after work, let me know." "Thank you," Rich nodded, but both knew that he wouldn't call. After Tom left, Rich opened his browser and, after a moment's hesitation, went to Instagram. Ellen's profile was open, and her latest posts loaded instantly. Here she is, smiling in a knitted sweater against the backdrop of the mountains. Here she is with a group of strangers, all laughing, holding mugs of something hot. And here, and this hit me the hardest, she was with some bearded guy. Both were sitting by the fire, her hand was on his shoulder. The caption read, "New friends, new energy. Freedom." Rich stared at the screen, his jaw clenching. He slammed the laptop shut, as if that would erase what he had seen. In the evening, he returned home, leaving his briefcase at the door. The house greeted him with the same oppressive silence. He turned on the TV just to fill the void, but the news about the market only irritated him. He turned it off and walked into the living room, where their family photos sat on the mantelpiece. One of them is a photo from the 20th wedding anniversary. He and Ellen are on the beach in Artba, smiling, her hair blowing in the wind. He took the frame, his thumb running along the glass. She looked happy then. Or did he think so? The memory surfaced unbidden. Summer of 1998, they just bought this house. Ellen was pregnant with twins and Rich had just gotten a promotion. They sat in the backyard, drinking lemonade, and he told her about his dream, a house by a lake somewhere in upstate New York. "There will be silence there," he said. "Just us, the water and the stars." Ellen laughed, rubbing his hand. "Sounds like a fairy tale, Rich. But first we need to raise children, pay off the mortgage." He agreed, put his dream on hold because family was more important. He always put family first. And now, he returned to reality, still holding the frame. His gaze fell on Ellen's post in his header, laughing, with this bearded man. Resentment flared up, hot and sharp. "I'm not her backup," he said out loud, his voice firm but shaking with suppressed anger. He opened the lid of the kitchen trash can and tossed the frame inside. The glass cracked, but he didn't try to reach it. Let him lie there. The next day at the office, he was even more collected, almost mechanical. Clients praised him for his attention to detail, but he barely heard them. His thoughts returned to Ellen, to her posts, to her words, "I'm suffocating." He didn't call her or write to her. His pride, the one that forced him to keep his back straight, even on the hardest days, did not allow it. If she wants freedom, let her. But he won't beg her to come back. On Tuesday evening, he stopped at the grocery store. At the checkout counter, Susan, a neighbor across the street whose daughter studied with Mia, called out to him. "Rich, how are you?" she asked with that intonation that showed that she knew more than she was saying. "Great, Suze," he replied, putting on a smile. "And you?" "Oh, it's all running around." She paused, fiddling with the receipt. "Listen, I saw Ellen on social networks. She's in Vermont, right? Looks happy." Rich felt his face harden. "She's doing her job," he said, picking up a bag of groceries. "See you, Susan." At home, he cooked himself dumplings, the first thing he found in the freezer. I sat down at the table, but the food seemed tasteless. He opened his phone and went back to Instagram. Ellen's new post, she's on a kayak, laughing. Her hair is wet from splash. Nearby is another man. Not the same bearded man, but also smiling, too close. Rich threw the phone on the table and the screen went dark. He stood up, walked into the living room, and looked again at the mantelpiece. Without that photo, she looked naked, but he didn't regret it. He didn't regret it. He repeated this to himself, standing in silence until his fists unclenched. "I'm not her backup," he said again, quieter now, as if convincing himself. It had been 2 weeks since Ellen had left for Vermont, and the Harper house had become something of a museum for Rich Harper, a repository of memories that he tried not to touch. On Wednesday evening, sitting in the living room with a glass of whiskey, Rich replayed their past in his head. He remembered how in the early 2000s they dreamed of a trip to Italy, Tuscany, small towns, wine, sunsets. Ellen then lit up, leafing through guidebooks, making plans for how they would wander the streets of Siena or drink espresso in Rome. Life intervened: children, a mortgage, his career, and the dream remained a dream. Now, looking at the empty mantelpiece, where there was no longer a photo of them together, Rich thought, maybe this is an opportunity. Not for reconciliation, no, he was not going to beg, but to see if Ellen had anything left for their marriage. If she refuses, it will be her choice, and he can move on. The next day, Thursday, he dialed her number. The phone buzzed for a long time, and he already thought that she would not answer. But finally, he heard her voice, slightly out of breath, as if she had just returned from a walk. "Rich." There was surprise in her tone, mixed with wariness. "Everything is fine. It's okay," he said, trying to sound even. "Are you in Vermont?" "Yes," she answered after a pause. "For a couple more weeks." "Did something happen?" He clutched the phone, his thumb running along the edge of the table. "I thought you might want to come home for the weekend." "Talk." "Should I talk?" She hesitated, and he heard a rustling sound, as if she had switched the phone to her other hand. "About what, Rich?" "About Italy," he said. His voice was firm, but everything inside was clenched. "We always talked about this trip. I can take a vacation, book tickets. You, me, Tuscany, as previously planned." There was silence on the other end of the line, so long that he thought the connection had been interrupted. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer but tinged with weariness. "Rich, I don't know. This is unexpected." Suddenly, he felt irritation boiling in his chest, but suppressed it. "I thought it was important to you. You always said that this is our dream." "It was a long time ago," she said quietly. "I'm not sure if this is what I need right now." He gritted his teeth, looking at the opposite wall where the painting Ellen had picked out at the fair 10 years ago hung. "What do you need, Ellen? Even more freedom, more bonfires with strangers." "It's not fair." Her voice became harsher. "You know that's not true." "Then come," he said, his tone cold, almost businesslike. "One day, let's talk. If you don't need Italy, say it to my face." She sighed, and he imagined her standing somewhere in the mountains, fiddling with the hem of her sweater, as she always did when she was nervous. "Okay," she said finally, "I'll come on Saturday. But Rich, don't expect me to have everything figured out yet." "I'm not expecting anything," he answered and hung up without saying goodbye. Saturday began with rain, fine and nasty, that drummed on the windows of the Harper house. Rich got up early, cleaned the kitchen, even though it was already immaculate, and made coffee, more out of habit than necessity. He didn't know what he expected from this day, but he felt that this was the last chance not for her, but for himself. To make sure he did everything he could. Ellen arrived at noon. He heard her Subaru rustle across the gravel and walked out onto the porch. She looked almost the same as always jeans, a dark green sweater, her hair slightly disheveled from the wind. But there was something new in her posture, a kind of lightness that irritated him. She smiled, but the smile was forced. "Hey, Rich," she said, walking up the steps. "The house looks, as always. Did you expect me to repaint it?" He replied, stepping back for her to enter. Inside, she paused in the hallway, her gaze running over familiar things: the console table, the empty space where their photo had once stood. She didn't say anything, but her lips pursed. Rich gestured towards the kitchen. "Coffee?" "Yes, thank you," she replied, sitting down at the island. He poured her a cup, trying not to notice how natural she looked here, as if she had never left. They were silent until he sat down opposite. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I'm serious about Italy. 2 weeks in September. I've already looked at the tickets. We can go to Siena, Florence, wherever you want." Ellen looked into the cup, her fingers curling around the ceramic. "That's nice, Rich. Is it true? But I can't." "Can't?" He leaned a little closer, his eyebrows knitted together. "Or don't you want to?" "It's not that simple," she said, finally looking up. "I'm still figuring myself out. Vermont ... It helps. I feel alive, you know, for the first time in a long time." "Alive," he repeated, the word sounding like an accusation. "And here you were dead, right? 30 years with me, with the children, and you were dead?" "Don't distort it." Her voice became sharper. "I'm not saying that everything was bad, but I lost myself, Rich. I was only your mother, only your wife. I want to know who I am without this." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "And how long does it take you to understand this? Another month? Year? Or do you just want me to sit and wait for you to decide?" "I'm not asking you to wait," she said quietly, but there was a spark of stubbornness in her eyes. "I'm not asking for anything at all. I need more freedom." "Freedom," he almost spat out the word. "Great. Then here's your freedom." He stood up, walked to the drawer in the living room, and returned with an envelope. Inside were printouts routes to Italy, which he found yesterday. He threw them on the table. "This was your chance, Ellen. You didn't take it." She looked at the envelope, but didn't touch it. "Rich, I rented an apartment in New Haven for a year." He froze, her words hung in the air like a blow. Apartment. Not a retreat, not a temporary quirk. She was already building a new life. Without him. His throat tightened, but he forced himself to speak. "You made a choice," he said coldly, his voice like a blade. "Congratulations." Ellen opened her mouth to say something, but he raised his hand. "No need. I don't want to hear. Leave." She stood up, her eyes sparkled, but she did not cry. "I didn't want it to happen like this," she said, but he had already turned away, looking out the window where the rain was still hammering on the glass. She took her bag and walked out, the door slamming quietly behind her. On Monday morning, Rich was sitting in the office of a lawyer, Mark Rosenberg, an old acquaintance with whom he had once played poker. The office smelled of leather and coffee, and neat stacks of papers lay on the table. Mark, balding and wearing thin-rimmed glasses, looked at Rich with professional sympathy. "So, Rich, are you sure you want to discuss this?" Mark asked, tapping his pen on the notepad. "Divorce is serious. Maybe we should wait until things calm down." Rich sat upright, his hands resting on the arms of his chair. "I'm not saying I want a divorce," he said, his voice level. "I just want to be ready. Just in case. Can you prepare the papers?" Mark nodded, writing something down. "Certainly. We can create a draft without submitting. Division of property, alimony, everything according to the standard. But Rich, are you sure you're okay? You and Ellen always seemed. Well, tough." Rich looked out the window at the gray sky above the city center. "Strong," he repeated with slight bitterness. "Yes, I thought so too." They talked for another half hour, discussing details that Rich only listened to with half an ear. His thoughts were somewhere else in the kitchen, where Ellen had said about the apartment, in her eyes as she left. He didn't want a divorce, not really. But he wanted control, wanted to be prepared if she decided that their marriage was a mistake that could simply be erased. When he left the office, the rain had stopped, but the air was damp. He got into the car, but did not start the engine. Instead, he took out his phone and opened the message from Tom that had arrived an hour ago. "Beer today? No questions asked, just a beer." Rich smiled but didn't answer. He put the phone in his pocket and drove home, into the silence that was now his new reality. Rich didn't call Ellen again or check her Instagram, although the temptation was great. His pride, like an old but strong shield, kept him in check. But inside he felt that he had to do something not for her, but for himself. Something to prove that he wasn't just a man who was abandoned. The idea came on a Friday evening while he was sitting in the office after work, flipping through old notes on his phone. Among his to-do lists and reminders, he came across an entry. Lake Winanock, waterfront property, $120K. He then went there with Tom on a fishing trip, and the sight 5 acres of pine trees and a rocky shore fell into his soul. He dreamed of a house there, of quiet mornings with a fishing rod, of the stars above his head. But Ellen then said that it was impractical, that the money was needed for college for the children. He agreed, as always. Now, looking at the recording, he felt a pang not of regret, but of determination. Why should he wait? This is his life, his dream. On Saturday morning, he called a real estate agent whose number he found in old correspondence. The woman, Marge, sounded cheerful despite the early hour. "Mr. Harper, the Winanock site, the one on the eastern shore," she clarified, her voice full of enthusiasm. "It's still on the market, but the price is now $180,000. Want to watch?" "Yes," Rich said, his voice firm. "Today, if possible." "Wow, you're not pulling it off," she laughed. "Okay, meet me at noon at the Highway 22 exit." Rich hung up the phone and felt something in his chest loosen for the first time in weeks. It was not an impulse, as it might seem. It was a decision, a step toward living life on my own terms, not in the shadow of Ellen's choices. Lake Winanock was a 3-hour drive from Connecticut in upstate New York, where rolling hills gave way to forests and asphalt gave way to gravel. Rich arrived in his Audi. Marge, a short woman of about 60 with bright red hair, was waiting for him at the old sign. She waved her hand as if they were old friends. "This is your future," she said, pointing to the area as they got out of the car. The shore stretched out in front of them. Pine trees, stones, dark water sparkling under the midday sun. 5 acres, your own pier, silence. A fisherman's paradise. Rich walked towards the water, his boots crunching on the pine needles. He inhaled it, smelled of pine and dampness, not like a suburban lawn. He imagined himself here, a tent, a fishing rod, coffee on the fire. No reminders of Ellen, no empty rooms, only him and his choice. "What do you say?" Marge asked, adjusting her glasses. "The place is hot, you know." A couple more people were interested. "I'll take it," said Rich, without taking his eyes off the lake. "How quickly can I apply?" Marge blinked, clearly not expecting such speed. "Well, if everything is ready, then in a couple of weeks. Do you have cash or a mortgage?" "Cash," he replied. He had savings put aside for a rainy day. It wasn't a rainy day, but it was close. "Great," she clapped her hands. "Then let's go and sign the papers." In the evening, Rich stopped by Tom Kelly, his friend and colleague who lived 10 minutes from his house. Tom answered the door wearing a football jersey with a bottle of beer in his hand. "Damn, Rich, you're alive," he said, grinning. "Come in, Marge is preparing chili." They sat in the backyard where the grill was burning and Tom's teenage children were making noise in the house. Marge, Tom's wife, placed a bowl of chili in front of Rich and left, saying, "Don't get drunk, boys." "Well, lay it out," said Tom, taking a sip of beer. "You look like you're up to something crazy." Rich picked at the chili with a spoon, then looked at his friend. "I bought a plot on Lake Winanock, 5 acres by the water." Tom choked on his beer. "Are you serious? The one you're talking about? Did you just go and buy it?" "Yes." Rich nodded. His face was calm, but there was a challenge in his eyes. "I signed the papers today." "Damn, man." Tom leaned back in his chair, fiddling with the ring on his finger. "This is cool, but damn, are you sure? That's a lot of money. So what, will you move there now? What about the house? And Ellen?" "The house isn't going anywhere," Rich said, his voice becoming harsher. "And Ellen, she made her choice. I'm not going to sit and wait for her to decide if she needs me." Tom shook his head, his eyebrows raised. "Look, I understand you're angry, but it's like, I don't know, escape. You've always been Mr. Stability, and now bam, a sight in the middle of nowhere. This is not an escape." Rich leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. "I'm building my future, Tom. I'm not running from the past. This is what I've wanted for a long time. Since she can allow her to do whatever she wants, why should I sit and suffer?" Tom looked at him, then nodded slowly. "Okay, dude, if that's what you decide, I'm for you. But damn, it's brave." He raised the bottle. "For your lake paradise." Rich clinked his beer, but his smile was restrained. He felt no triumph, only steely determination. A week later, on the following Saturday, Rich went to his site for the first time. He loaded the trunk with a tent, a sleeping bag, a fishing rod, and a box of canned food, bread, coffee. The road was long, but he turned on an old Springsteen album and felt the tension release. When he turned onto the gravel road to the lake, the sun was already setting, turning the water crimson. He pitched a tent near the shore, on a flat area between pine trees. The fire crackled, and he sat looking at the flames with a can of beer in his hand. There was silence deafening only the rustling of waves and the distant cry of an owl. He lay on his back, looking at the stars, which seemed brighter than in Connecticut. For the first time in months, he felt good, as if he had lifted a weight he had been carrying for years. Lake Winanock lay surrounded by pine trees and hills, its dark water reflecting the sky like a mirror. Rich Harper's property, purchased last week, was still just land and a dream. 5 acres overgrown with grass, with a rickety barn that the previous owner proudly called the house. The barn was in a deplorable state, a rotten floor, a leaky roof, windows covered with the dust of time. But Rich saw potential in him. It was his, and he was going to fix it with his own hands. He drove here every weekend from Connecticut, bringing tools, boards, and dogged determination. Work distracted him from thoughts of Ellen, from her new apartment in New Haven, from her choice, which still stung him like a thorn. On this Saturday morning, a month after buying the property, Rich stood outside the barn, wearing jeans and an old flannel shirt, with a hammer in his hand. He had just ripped a rotten board out of the wall when he heard the crunch of gravel under the tires. The pickup truck, old but sturdy, stopped at the edge of the lot. A woman came out of the cabin about 40 years old, wearing a faded baseball cap, a denim jacket, and boots that clearly knew dirt. Her blonde hair, streaked with gray, was pulled back into a low ponytail, and her face, lightly freckled, expressed a mixture of curiosity and slight mockery. "You must be the new guy in town," she said, putting her hands on her hips. Her voice was low and hoarse, like that of someone who laughs a lot. "Claire Dawson. I have a store in the village. Tackle, bait, everything for fishermen. And this," she nodded towards the barn, "looks like it's about to fall on your head." Rich stood up straight, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Rich Harper," he introduced himself, his tone polite but reserved. "And this shed will last longer than you think." Claire chuckled, walking around the barn and tapping the wall with the toe of her boot. An optimist, that is. Half the boards are rotten, and the roof lets rain through like a sieve. Do you even know where to start? I'll figure it out, Rich said, returning to work. He was in no mood for chatter, especially with a stranger who looked at his barn like she looked at a sick dog. She didn't leave. Instead, she leaned against the pickup truck, arms crossed. Stubborn, huh? Okay, I'm not going in. But if you need a saw or a normal hammer, come see me. The store is 2 miles down the road. And, she paused, her eyes twinkling slyly, I know a couple of guys who can help with the repairs. For beer, of course. Thank you, Rich nodded, without looking up from the board. I can handle it myself. Claire laughed, short and loud. Himself, that is. Well, good luck, city guy. Don't fall through the floor. She got into a pickup truck and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust behind her. Rich shook his head, but the corner of his mouth twitched. Her straightforwardness was refreshing. In Connecticut, people spoke either too cautiously or with pity, especially after Ellen left. Here, it seems, everything was simpler. Claire appeared again a couple of days later, on Sunday, when Rich was struggling with a rotten beam in the barn. He heard her pick up and tensed internally, but she came out with a toolbox in one hand and a thermos in the other. Coffee, she said, putting the thermos on a tree stump. I cooked it in the morning. And don't argue, you look like you haven't slept in a week. Rich, covered in dust, looked at her with suspicion. Why are you doing this? What, coffee? She shrugged, opening the drawer and taking out a screwdriver. Because you are here alone, like a fool. Plus, I'm bored. He couldn't help but smile. I didn't ask for help. I didn't ask, she retorted, approaching the beam. I'll help. Or do you want this thing to crush you? Rich rolled his eyes but obeyed. They worked in silence, only her rare instructions, hold it straight, don't pull, broke the silence. Claire knew her stuff. Her hands moved confidently, without fuss. Once the beam was secured, she stepped back, wiping her hands on her jeans. Not bad for a city guy, she said, narrowing her eyes. Where did you learn? My father was a carpenter, Rich answered, a little surprised that he answered at all. I helped him as a child. Claire nodded, as if that explained a lot. Then you're not completely hopeless. Let's go, Break. The coffee will cool down. They sat on a log by the water, and she poured coffee into 2 tin mugs. Rich took a sip strong, with a slight bitterness, better than his morning one. He looked at the lake, feeling the tension in his shoulders release. Okay, Harper, Claire began, taking a sip from her mug. What brought you here? It's not like you're one of those people who just buys leaky sheds. Rich tensed, his fingers clenching around his mug. I wanted a place for fishing, he said briefly. Silence, nature, all that. Yeah, of course, she snorted. You don't look like a fan of meditating by the water. More like someone who is running away from something. Wife, job, or the tax office. He glanced at her, his eyebrows furrowed. Are you always this curious? Only when I see a guy who works like he wants to punish himself, she answered, her tone light but her eyes serious. But okay, if you don't want to, don't say so. I'm not a cop. Rich was silent, looking at the water. He didn't want to talk about Ellen, about her leaving, about the apartment in New Haven. But Claire didn't press, and it was unexpectedly pleasant. They finished their coffee, and she stood up, stretching. Okay, I'm going. If you change your mind about helping, you know where to find me. Thank you, he said, and this time his voice was softer. For coffee. Not for coffee, for saving your barn. She winked and went to the pickup truck. Claire began to appear more often, usually with some excuse, either she brought nails or she was just passing by. Rich didn't ask, but he didn't drive him away either. Her presence was unobtrusive, like the wind over a lake, and he liked her straightforwardness. She didn't lisp, didn't look with pity like her colleagues in the office. They worked together, strengthened the walls, patched the roof, took out the trash. Sometimes she talked about the village, about old Bill, who caught fish with his bare hands, or about the annual festival where everyone got drunk on cider. Rich listened, sometimes laughed, but kept his distance. His principles, loyalty, honor, even in a marriage that was cracking at the seams, did not allow him to relax. One Sunday, when they finished fixing the window, Claire took 2 cans of beer from her backpack. The sun was setting, turning the lake golden. She handed 1 can to Rich, her eyebrows raised questioningly. "Get to work," she said, opening her can with a hiss. Rich looked at the beer, then at her. Her eyes were warm, but with a slight sparkle, as if she was testing him. He shook his head. "Thank you, but I'm here for business, not for company." Claire laughed, throwing her head back. "Oh, Harper, you're like a monk." "Okay, I don't offer it anymore." She took a sip, looking at the lake. He looked out at the water, feeling his principles holding him like an anchor. He was still married, and even if Ellen left, he wasn't going to become a man who broke his own rules. But in that moment, with Claire by his side and the lake in front of him, he felt something new. New Haven welcomed Ellen Harper with the noise of the streets, the smell of coffee shops, and the feeling that life here moves faster than in the suburbs of Connecticut. Her new apartment on the 3rd floor of an old brick building in the city center was small but bright. Large windows, wooden floors, several boxes that she still had not unpacked. At 50, Ellen felt both liberated and lost. She had left home rich, her 30-year marriage to find herself. But now, standing in this strange apartment, she wasn't sure what that meant. Her days in New Haven were filled with new activities. After a retreat in Vermont, where she learned to meditate and made fleeting friends, Ellen signed up for a ceramics class at a local studio. Her hands, accustomed to household chores, now needed the clay, trying to fashion crooked cups. She also started going to yoga in the park, where the instructor, a young guy with dreadlocks, called her the life of the group. She liked the attention, she liked feeling seen, but every evening, when she returned to the empty apartment, she felt an emptiness that she could not explain. One such evening in early June, Ellen sat on the couch with a glass of wine and scrolled through her phone. She opened Instagram, her fingers hovering over a post she'd posted earlier in the day. A photo from a ceramics class, her hands covered in clay, a smile on her face. Caption: "New beginnings. Freedom." The likes poured in from new acquaintances, from old friends from Connecticut, even from Mia, her daughter. But nothing from Rich. She didn't expect him to like it, but she checked anyway, hoping for what? Reaction? Anger? Love? She didn't know herself. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Jake, the guy she met at a concert at a local bar a couple of weeks ago. He was 42, played guitar in an indie band, wore faded jeans, and talked about music as if it were the meaning of life. Ellen was attracted by his energy, his lightness, so different from Rich's restraint. "Hey, free soul," Jake said, walking in with a bottle of beer in his hand. His dark hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and his smile was such that you couldn't help but want to smile back. "Ready for an adventure?" "Adventure?" Ellen laughed, putting her glass on the table. "Jake, it's already 9 o'clock in the evening. I thought we'd just watch a movie." "The movie is boring," he winked, sitting too close to the sofa. "There's an open mic at Joe's bar today. Come on, I'll play something for you. Maybe you'll even sing." "I don't sing," she said, but her voice was soft, almost flirtatious. She loved the way he looked at her, as if she were the center of the world. "I haven't had those looks with Rich in years." "Then you'll just be my muse," Jake said, his hand resting on her knee. Ellen felt warm, but immediately tensed. It was too fast, too alien. She carefully moved away, taking the glass. "Maybe another time," she said, trying to smile. "I'm tired. Ceramics, you know, are exhausting." He shrugged, not offended. "Whatever you say, Ellen, but you should live, not hide in this apartment." His words hurt her because they were true. She left for freedom, but now, it seems, she was simply hiding from Rich, from the children, from herself. After Jake left, she opened the phone and, on impulse, dialed Rich's number. She needed his voice, his firmness, even if she knew he would be cold. He answered after the third ring. "Ellen," His voice was smooth, but there was steel in it. What's happened? Nothing happened, she said, her fingers nervously fiddling with the hem of her sweater. I just wanted to hear from you. How are you? Fine, he answered after a pause. Working. And you, still finding yourself? His tone was like a slap in the face, but she swallowed the insult. I'm trying, she said quietly. I'm in New Haven. Apartment, courses, everything. But it's hard, Rich. Sometimes I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. You made a choice, he said, his voice as cold as the winter wind. You wanted freedom. Here she is. What do you expect from me? I don't know, her voice trembled. Maybe you should say that everything will be fine, or that you miss. I miss? He almost laughed, bitterly and briefly. Ellen, you left. You rented an apartment. You live your life. Don't expect me to be your crying pillow. She clutched the phone, her eyes stinging. You're always like this, Rich. Everything is black and white. Can't you just talk to me? I'm talking, he said, but I'm not going to pretend that everything is fine. You wanted to be a lone bee. He fell silent, then added more quietly, I need to go. The connection was interrupted, and Ellen remained sitting, looking at the phone. Her pride, the one that made her leave, signed the contract for the apartment, smile in the photo did not allow her to call back. But doubt grew inside. What if she was wrong? What if this freedom is just an illusion? The next evening, Ellen went to a bar with Jake. He performed, his guitar singing along with his raspy voice, and the crowd clapped. Ellen sat at the table, sipping wine, and caught his eye. After the set, he sat down next to her, his hand casually resting on the back of her chair. Well, Muse, how was I? He asked, his eyes sparkling with adrenaline. Great, she said, smiling. You're really good. You're really beautiful, he said, leaning closer. You know, I'm glad you're here. You are like a fresh wind. Her cheeks flushed, but her heart sank. His words were pleasant, but empty. She suddenly remembered Rich, his discreet compliments, his reliability. Jake was like a bright flash, but Rich was home. Or it was before. Offie took a photo together, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. Ellen posted the photo on Instagram, her fingers trembling as she wrote the caption, Music and good company, live. She knew Rich would see. Part of her wanted him to see, to feel the sting like she felt when he cut her off on the phone. But when she hit publish, her heart wasn't in the right place. She looked at the screen, at her smile, and thought, that's not me. July on Lake Winnenauk was hot. The air shimmered over the water, and the pine trees smelled of resin. Rich Harper's cabin, still more barn than home, has begun to take shape. In 2 months, he strengthened the walls, replaced rotten beams, and cleaned out debris that had accumulated for years. He drove up from Connecticut every weekend, loading his car with tools, lumber, and dogged determination. The work was hard, but life-saving. Every hammered nail, every sawn board pushed thoughts of Ellen away. On this Saturday morning, Rich stood on a stepladder, nailing the last board to the side wall. Sweat ran down his back, soaking his old t-shirt. The sky was clear, but the forecast called for a storm in the evening, and he wanted to finish before the rain. His phone, lying on the stump, vibrated, but he ignored it. Probably Tom, who was still calling with offers to drink beer and talk. Rich wasn't ready to talk. He was ready to go. The crunch of gravel made him turn around. Claire Dawson's pickup truck, already familiar, stopped at the site. She came out, wearing her usual baseball cap and jeans, with a toolbox in her hand. Her blonde hair with gray streaks came out from under her cap, and her gaze was, as always, with a slight mockery. Harper, I brought tiles. Cheaper than in the city. Rich stepped down from the stepladder, wiping his hands on his pants. I didn't ask for tiles, he said, his tone even but tinged with irritation. Claire appeared too often, and her presence, while helpful, was beginning to stress him out. She was straightforward, warm, but he didn't want any ambiguity. I didn't ask, Claire answered, narrowing her eyes. Listen, you are here alone, like a fool, fighting with this barn. I'm just helping. If you don't want the tiles, throw them away. He looked at her, then at the box. But accepting help meant letting her get closer, and he wasn't ready. "Thank you," he said finally, "but I can handle it myself. I don't need help." Claire rolled her eyes, but smiled. "Stubborn as hell. Okay, I'm off. If you change your mind, you know where to find me." She got into the pickup truck, but before driving away, she shouted, "Don't fall off the roof, city guy." Rich shook his head, but the corner of his mouth twitched. Her energy was contagious, but he wasn't about to give in. He returned to work, deciding that he would finish the wall by lunchtime and then work on the roof. He needed to prove not to Claire, not to Ellen, but to himself that he could do it. 1. By midday, the sky began to darken and the clouds thickened, promising a storm sooner than expected. Rich moved to the roof, dragging heavy sheets of tiles that he had bought in the city. His phone vibrated again, and this time he glanced at the screen. Mia. His daughter rarely called without reason, and he felt a pang of worry. Throwing off his gloves, he answered. "Dad," her voice was harsh, almost accusing. "Do you even know what's going on with Mom?" Rich frowned as he leaned against the wall of the barn. "Hello, Mia. I'm glad to hear from you, too. What's wrong with Mom?" "She's in New Haven, living with some dude," Mia blurted out. "I saw her posts. She posts photos with this musician. What are you doing? Are you sitting and silent?" Rich clutched the phone, his jaw tense. He knew about the photo with Jake. He saw it briefly before blocking Ellen's Instagram. But hearing it from Mia, with her anger and pain, was like a punch in the gut. "Mia, calm down," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "Your mother does what she wants. It's her choice." "Her choice?" Mia almost screamed. "And you? Why don't you fight for her? You just gave up, right? Dad, you've been married for 30 years. You can't just pick it up and let it go." Rich closed his eyes, feeling anger and pain fighting in his chest. He wanted to say that he fought, he offered Italy. He waited, he hoped. But his pride, his principles did not allow him to beg. "Mia," he said, his voice becoming firmer, "marriage is not a one-sided game. This is mutual respect. Your mom is gone. She rented an apartment. She lives her own life. I'm not going to crawl after her on my knees." "But you don't even try." Her voice broke, and he heard her sniffle. "You're always so cold. It's like you don't care." "I care," he said, and his voice trembled, betraying the pain he was hiding. "But I will not humiliate myself." Mia was silent, then quietly said, "Dad, I just want everything to be like it was before." "Me too," he answered, softer than he intended. "But sometimes you have to move forward." He paused, then added, "How are your studies? Are you okay?" "Fine," she muttered. "Okay, I have to go." "Mia," he said before she hung up, "I love you. And Ethan, you can always call me." "Yeah," she answered, and the connection ended. Rich looked at the phone, his throat tight. He wanted to call her back to explain, but what could he say? That his heart still hurts. Why is he building this house so as not to go crazy? Instead, he threw the phone onto the stump and returned to the roof, his hammer hitting the nails with renewed vigor. By evening, a storm covered the lake. The wind howled, tearing leaves from the pine trees, and rain pelted the roof, which Rich was still trying to finish. He was alone, wet to the skin, but he didn't stop. The last sheets of shingles needed to be secured, and he wasn't about to give up. Lightning flashed somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled over the water. He knew it was stupid, dangerous, but stopping meant admitting defeat. "Come on, Harper," he muttered to himself as he tightened the last screw. His hands shook from the cold, but he continued. It wasn't just a roof. It was his resilience, his proof that he could cope with the house, with the pain, with life without Ellen. When the last leaf was in place, the rain intensified, drenching his face. Rich stepped down from the stepladder, his boots crunching in the mud. He stood by the barn, looking at the lake, where the waves crashed against theirs. The storm raged, but the roof held on. He held on. He went inside, where it was damp but dry. Sitting down on an old chair, he wiped his face with his sleeve and felt the tension release. He did it. His principles work. Keep your word, don't bend were his anchor. And even if Mia didn't understand, even if Ellen was gone, he knew he hadn't lost himself. August on Lake Winanock smelled of roasted meat, mown grass, and light smoke from fires. Rich Harper's little house, which he worked hard to patch up every weekend, now looked almost lived in. A new roof, reinforced walls, a couple of windows that he had put in with Claire's help, albeit reluctantly. Rich still commuted from Connecticut, spending Saturdays and Sundays in dust and sweat, but physical labor became his salvation. Rich was painting the side of the barn this Saturday morning when he heard the familiar crunch of gravel. Claire Dawson's pickup truck showed up unannounced, as always. In Claire's hands is a paper bag that smells of fresh baked goods. Muffins, blueberry. Rich came down the stairs, wiping his hands on an old rag. His t-shirt was stained with paint and his face was covered in dust. "I'm eating," he said, his tone dry but not hostile. "And I didn't ask for muffins." "I didn't ask," Claire grinned, her eyes sparkling. "Listen, there's a festival in the village tonight. BBQ, music, cider. Everyone will. You need to get out of this barn, meet people." Rich frowned as he went back to painting. "I don't like festivals," he said briefly. "Noisy, crowded. I'm here for the silence." "Quiet is great," Claire agreed, leaning against the pickup. "But you're not a hermit, Harper, although you are trying to become one. Let's go hang out for an hour and try Bill's ribs. He cooks them like a god. If you don't like it, you leave." Rich brushed the wall, his movements harsher than necessary. He didn't want festivals, neighbors, or conversations that would inevitably lead to questions about his life, about his wife, about why he was alone. But Claire stood, did not leave, and her persistence, mixed with slight mockery, pierced his armor. "Why do you need this?" he asked, finally turning to her. "Why are you here all the time? I said I could handle it myself." Claire shrugged, her smile softening. "Because I like you. You're stubborn, but you're not an asshole, and I don't want you to go crazy here alone. Plus, I promised Marge to bring a new guy, and you're the only one who comes up." Rich looked at her, his eyebrows knitted together. Her directness was disarming, but he sensed a catch. She wasn't flirting, not really, but her attention was too close. He shook his head. "1 hour. But I don't dance, sing, or chat with everyone I meet." "Agreed," Claire said, her eyes lighting up. "I'll pick you up at 6. Wear something without dye if you can." The festival in the village of Winanock was in full swing when Rich and Claire arrived. The clearing near the old barn was hung with garlands. The tables were laden with food, ribs, corn, pies. A local band played country music, children ran around with balloons, and adults with mugs of cider laughed louder than necessary. Rich, in a clean shirt and jeans, felt out of place. He stayed close to Claire, who seemed to know everyone. She introduced him either to Bill, a skinny old man with a beard who showed off his ribs, or to Sally, a curvaceous woman who sold honey. "Rich, try this," Claire said, handing him a plate of ribs covered in sauce. "Bill will kill you if you refuse." Rich took a rib and took a bite. The meat was tender with a smoky flavor. "Not bad," he admitted, wiping his hands with a napkin. "Not bad." Bill, standing nearby, was indignant. "Boy, this is art. You're from the city, right? They don't do that there." "Connecticut," Rich said, his tone neutral. "And we have barbecue." "Ha, Connecticut." Bill patted him on the shoulder. "Okay, city guy, if you learn to fish, I'll respect you." Claire laughed, jabbing Rich with her elbow. "Heard? Bill is giving you a chance." Rich just chuckled, but the corner of his mouth twitched. He didn't want to admit it, but the atmosphere noisy, warm, without a hint of pity was pleasant. He ate, listened, answered briefly, but kept his distance. His eyes followed Claire as she chatted with her neighbors, her laughter ringing like a bell. She was in her element, and that made her even brighter. But he reminded himself, that's not what he's here for. He is married. Bye. As the music got louder, Claire pulled him towards the dancers. "Come on, Harper, one dance won't kill you." "I don't dance," he said, retreating. His voice was firm, but anxiety flashed in his eyes. "Oh, okay." She grabbed his hand. Her fingers were warm. "This is not a ball, just stomping around with a guitar. Relax for once." Rich pulled his hand away, his face becoming more serious. "Claire, I'm still not free," he said quietly but clearly. "And I don't play games." She froze, her smile faded, but her eyes did not turn away. They looked at each other for a moment, and something flashed in her gaze, not resentment, but respect. "I see," she said finally, her voice soft. "No games, Harper. Just a dance." But I understood. Tension hung between them, but she did not leave. Instead, she nodded towards the table with drinks. "Then cider? No obligation." He nodded, feeling his shoulders relax. "Cider is fine." They took the mugs and moved to the edge of the clearing, where the noise was quieter. Claire didn't speak up, and Rich was grateful for that. He looked at the lake, where the stars were reflected, and for the first time in months he thought, what if he could be happy? Not with Claire, not with anyone else, but on his own. Without Ellen, without pain, without waiting. This thought was alien, but warm, like cider in his hand. "Beautiful, huh?" Claire said, looking at the water. "It's always like this here. That's why I didn't leave." "Yes," Rich replied, his voice quieter than usual. "Beautiful." He said no more, but the stars above the lake looked at him, and he looked back, feeling something inside begin to thaw. September in New Haven was cool, with a light wind that blew fallen leaves along the sidewalks. Ellen Harper's apartment, still half unpacked, smelled of freshly brewed coffee and clay from her ceramics class. At 50, Ellen was trying to build a new life. Yoga in the morning, sculpting classes on Tuesdays, evenings in bars with Jake, the musician whose charisma had once seemed like her salvation. But now, 3 months after leaving home, her freedom began to feel like a mask, bright, but empty. She smiled in the photo on Instagram, drank wine with new acquaintances, but every evening, closing the apartment door, she felt loneliness squeezing her chest. It all started with a little thing. One Friday evening, Jake invited her to another concert of his group. The bar was crowded, the air thick with beer and cigarette smoke. Jake sang, his voice crackling under his guitar, and the crowd sang along. Ellen sat at the table, sipping a gin and tonic, but her mind was elsewhere. She looked at Jake, his faded jeans, his careless smile, and suddenly realized she didn't need him. His energy, his compliments, his lightness, all of it was like bright fireworks, beautiful, but fleeting. She missed something else, Rich's reliability, his calm strength, their morning coffee when words were not needed. After the concert, Jake sat down next to her, his hand casually resting on her shoulder. "Well, Muse, how was I?" he asked, his eyes sparkling with adrenaline. Ellen smiled, but the smile was forced. "Excellent, as always," she said, pushing her glass away. "But Jake, we need to talk." He frowned, removing his hand. "Sounds serious. What's happened?" She looked at him, her fingers fiddling with the hem of her sweater, an old habit she had never broken. "It doesn't work," she said quietly. "You're cool, really. But I'm not who I want to be with you." Jake leaned back in his chair, his eyebrows raised. "Seriously, I thought you liked this movement. Concerts, bars, freedom. You yourself said that you were tired of your boring life." "I thought so," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But this is not freedom. This is escape. I tried to run away from myself, from my life, and I can't pretend anymore." He looked at her, then shrugged, his smile a little bitter. "Okay, Ellen, if that's what you decide, I won't keep you. But you know, you're great. If you change your mind, I'm here." "Thank you," she said, her throat tightening. She stood up, threw on her jacket, and left the bar without looking back. Outside, the wind whipped across her face, and she inhaled, feeling tears sting her eyes. Not because of Jake, but because of the truth she finally admitted. Her leaving was selfish. She left Rich, their marriage, their family, thinking she would find herself. But all she found was emptiness. The next day, Ellen sat in her apartment, looking at the boxes she had never unpacked. Her phone lay on the table, the screen glowing with a message from Mia. Mom, are you okay? Dad doesn't talk about you at all. Ellen reread it 3 times, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She wanted to write to her daughter that everything would get better, but the words seemed like a lie. Instead, she opened old photos of her and Rich on the beach in Artba, at the twins' graduation, at dinner in their kitchen. Her heart sank. She missed him, not the idea of marriage, but him. By his morning grumbling, by his habit of folding the newspaper evenly, by his firmness, which has always been her anchor. She dialed his number, but he didn't answer. After the 5th ring, the voicemail came on. "This is Rich Harper. Leave a message." His voice, calm and businesslike, cut her like a knife. She hung up without leaving anything. So she called Tom Kelly, their mutual friend, hoping to find out where Rich was. "Ellen," Tom answered after the 2nd ring, his voice wary. "Haven't heard from you for a long time. How are you?" "Okay," she lied, her fingers clenching the phone. "Tom, I wanted to talk to Rich. Is he at home?" Tom paused, and she heard him exhale. "He's not in Connecticut, Ellen. It's on Lake Winanock. I bought a plot there and am building some kind of house. He practically lives there on weekends." Lake Winanock. Ellen frowned, her heart beating faster. She remembered Rich talking about such a place years ago, his dream of fishing, of silence. "Is he alone there?" "Yeah," Tom said, but there was something evasive in his tone. "Look, Ellen, I don't know what's going on with you, but Rich, he's not in the mood to talk. Maybe give him time." "Time," she repeated, her voice bitter. "I already gave him time. Thank you, Tom." She hung up, her mind reeling. Rich is on the lake, building a house, living his life. Without her. Part of her was angry, how dare he move on. But another part, a larger one, felt guilty. She left him, and now expected him to wait for her return. Her pride fought with a desire to fix everything, but the latter won. She must see him, talk to him, explain. He must listen to her. They've been together for 30 years, that means something. Ellen stood up, her movements fast, almost feverish. She threw a sweater, jeans, and a toothbrush into her bag. In the drawer, I found an old letter from Rich, a short note he wrote to her on their 10th anniversary. "You are my home, Ellen. Always." She clutched the paper, her eyes stinging. She will go to Connecticut, and if he is not there, then to the lake. She'll get him back. Should. On Sunday morning, Ellen parked her Subaru in front of her house. The familiar red brick, the white shutters, the lawn that Rich always mowed on Saturdays, everything was the same, but foreign. She knocked, then opened the door with her key. Silence hit her like cold air. The kitchen was empty, without the usual smell of coffee. There was a missing photo of them on the mantelpiece, the one from the beach. She froze, her fingers clutching the letter in her pocket. "Where is he?" She called Marge, Tom's wife, who always knew everything about everyone. "Ellen, dear," Marge's voice was warm, but careful. "Rich on the lake. He is almost never at home. He's building something there. They say it's some kind of barn." "Thank you, Marge," Ellen said, her voice shaking. She hung up, feeling determination mixed with fear. She got into the car, entered Lake Winanock into the GPS, and drove off. The road was long, 3 hours through hills and forests, but she did not stop. Her mind raced between hope and doubt. What will she say? What loves him? What was wrong? What if he doesn't want to see her? As she turned onto the gravel road toward the lake, her heart was pounding. She didn't know what lay ahead, but knew one thing: she had to try. Lake Winanock was calm in the September light, its dark water reflecting the pine trees and low clouds. Rich Harper, wearing a threadbare flannel shirt and jeans, worked outside his house, which now looked more like a home than a barn. He hammered nails into a new window frame, each blow of the hammer precise, almost mechanical. Work became his refuge from thoughts of Ellen, from her new life in New Haven, from the pain that he hid under his pride. He didn't call her, didn't answer her rare messages, but her departure was still like an open wound that he tried not to touch. The crunch of gravel made him look up. He expected to see Claire's pickup truck, but instead, Ellen's Subaru was parked in the road. Rich froze, the hammer frozen in his hand. His heart sank, but his face remained stony. She got out of the car, wearing jeans and a green sweater, her hair disheveled from the wind. She looked almost the same as before, but her eyes tired, with a shadow of guilt indicated that something had changed. "Rich," she said, her voice soft but shaking. She stopped a few steps away, her hands nervously fiddling with the hem of her sweater. "We need to talk." Rich slowly lowered the hammer, his gaze cold, almost alien. "Speak," he said, his voice smooth but sharp as a blade. "But I don't have to listen." Ellen flinched, but did not retreat. "I know you're angry," she began, her words cautious, as if she were treading on thin ice. "And you have the right. But I was wrong, Rich. I want to fix everything." He looked at her, his jaw clenching. "I was wrong." This word hung in the air like a mockery. He remembered her suitcase, her words about freedom, her photo with that musician. Wrong? He wiped his hands on his jeans to avoid clenching them into fists. "Fix it," he repeated, his voice bitter. "You left, Ellen. I rented an apartment. She lived her life. Now what? Are you bored?" "That's not true." Her voice became louder, resentment flashed in it. "I thought that I needed freedom, that I had lost myself. But I realized that I had lost us. You. I miss you, Rich." He laughed, short and joyless. "Are you bored? Are you serious? You left me, Ellen. She abandoned our marriage, our children, everything we had built for 30 years. And now you come here because you're lonely?" His eyes, usually calm, now burned with pain that he could not hide. Ellen stepped closer, her eyes shining with tears. "I know I hurt, and I'm sorry, I really am. But you don't even try to understand. You just cut me off like I didn't matter. You're always like that, cold, as if you don't care." "I care," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "But I'm not going to run after you, begging you to come back. You made a choice. Live with him." She shook her head, her hands clenched into fists. "You can't just write me off, Rich. We are married. This means something. I'm ready to work on this, ready to fix everything. Why can't you meet me halfway?" He looked at her, his chest heaving. Part of him wanted to grab her, shake her, ask why she hadn't thought of this before. But his pride, his principles, loyalty, dignity held him like steel chains. "Halfway," he said, his voice became quieter, but firmer. "I suggested Italy, Ellen. I waited, and you chose an apartment and some guy with a guitar. Don't tell me about the halfway point." Her face turned pale, tears finally flowing down her cheeks. "It wasn't like that," she whispered. "Jake, he didn't mean anything. I was just trying to feel alive. But I realized that I want you. Our home, our life." Rich turned away, looking at the lake, where the water quietly splashed against the shore. Her words cut, but he did not give in. He couldn't. Not now, when he finally began to build something of his own without her. But her tears, her voice, they still clung like old hooks. At that moment, he noticed movement on the road. Claire's pickup stopped at the edge of the lot, but she didn't get out. Her eyes, visible through the windshield, met his, but she remained in the car, respecting their space. Rich felt a pang of gratitude. Claire knew boundaries, unlike Ellen. "Rich, please," Ellen said, her voice almost pleading. "Give me a chance. Talk to me. Not here, not like that. Maybe at dinner. Just listen." He turned to her, his face unreadable, but his eyes betrayed the storm within. He didn't want dinner, didn't want to talk. But part of him, the part that still remembered their wedding, their children, their morning coffee, wanted to close this chapter. "Not for her, for myself." "Okay," he said finally, his voice cold, but even. "Dinner. Today. At a diner in the village. But don't expect me to change my mind." Ellen wiped away her tears, her lips twitching into a faint smile. "Thank you, Rich. I really want to fix everything." He didn't answer, just nodded and returned to the house, taking the hammer. She stood there for another minute, then got into the car and drove away. Claire, after waiting for the Subaru to disappear, got out of the pickup truck, but did not approach. She simply looked at him, her gaze warm but reserved. "Everything is fine?" she asked, her voice neutral. Yes, Rich answered without looking at her. I'm just closing the old door. Claire nodded without asking questions. If you need me, I'm at the store. She's driven away, leaving him alone with a hammer and thoughts. Rich hammered in another nail, his movements harsh but precise. He agreed to dinner not for Ellen, but to put an end to it, to prove to himself that he could look her in the eyes and not break. Joe's Diner in Winnenock was a place where time seemed to stand still. Worn wooden tables, the smell of fried burgers, a neon sign flashing in the window. On this September evening, Rich Harper sat at a corner table across from Ellen, his wife, who had left 3 months earlier to seek freedom. The light from the lamp above the table cast shadows on her face, highlighting wrinkles he hadn't noticed before. She looked tired but determined, her hands nervously fiddling with her napkin. Rich, wearing a clean shirt and jeans, sat upright, his face as impenetrable as a stone wall. He did not agree to this dinner for reconciliation, to prove to himself that he can leave without looking back. The waitress, an older woman with dyed red hair, placed coffee and a plate of fries in front of them, which they ordered out of politeness. "Anything else?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "No, thank you," Rich said, his voice smooth but firm. The waitress nodded and left, leaving them in awkward silence. Ellen cleared her throat, her fingers tightening around her mug. "Rich," she began, her voice soft, almost pleading, "I know you're angry, and I deserve it, but I want to say thank you for everything, for 30 years, for the children, for the freedom you gave me." Rich raised an eyebrow, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Freedom?" he repeated, his tone cold, with a slight mockery. "You left, Ellen. I rented an apartment and made new friends. I didn't give you freedom, you took it." She looked down, her cheeks slightly red. "I know," she said quietly, "and I was wrong. I thought I needed to be alone to find myself, but I realized that without you. This is not me. I want to go back, Rich. Start again. We can fix everything." He looked at her, his eyes were dark, unreadable. Her words, "start over," sounded like an echo of their old promises, but now they seemed empty. He remembered her suitcase, her Instagram posts, her smile next to that musician. He was silent, his fingers slowly tapping on the table. Finally, he leaned a little closer, his voice deeper, almost intimate, but with a sharp edge. "Ellen," he said, looking her straight in the eye, "answer me honestly. While you were looking for your freedom, were you with someone physically close?" He paused, his gaze never leaving hers. "Have you been with someone other than me?" She froze, her breathing hitched. Her eyes, full of tears, dropped to the table, to the crumpled napkin, to the coffee mug, anywhere but at him. This silence was an answer louder than any words. Rich felt something tighten in his chest, but he didn't look away. He waited. "Rich, she began, her voice barely audible. "I was lost. That's enough," he interrupted, his voice firm but not loud. He leaned back in his chair, his face remained expressionless, but his eyes betrayed pain deep, but restrained. "But I'm not, Ellen. Even when you demanded freedom, even when you left, I did not take advantage of mine. You were my only woman. All these months, all these years." Her face was distorted, tears flowed down her cheeks, but she did not wipe them away. "Rich, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want to. I didn't think it would be like this. Please give me a chance. We can get through this. We always got through." He looked at her, and he realized that there was no return. Not because he didn't love her, a part of him still did, but because she had broken more than their marriage. She broke his trust. Rich took an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket and placed it on the table between them. Ellen looked at him, her eyes widening. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Divorce papers," he said, his voice calm but firm, without a hint of vindictiveness. "You broke our balance, Ellen. I won't go back to the way things were." She shook her head, her hands trembling. "Rich, no. Please. We can fix everything. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't do it." He leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. I thank you, he said, and his voice became softer, but not weaker. For 25 years, for Mia and Ethan, here's to good days. But I can't live with a man who chose a different life and then came back because it didn't work out. My pride, my principles, they don't allow it, and you know it. Ellen covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Rich, I love you, she whispered, her voice broken. I've always loved you. He looked at her, and his throat tightened. He wanted to say that he loved her too, but the words stuck. Instead, he stood up and put a 20 on the table for coffee and potatoes. Read the documents, he said. If you agree, sign it. If not, the lawyer will decide everything. She raised her head, her eyes full of pain. Rich, please don't go. He stopped, his hand resting on the back of the chair. For a second, he thought he could stay, listen, try. But then he remembered her silence, her downcast eyes, and his determination returned. Goodbye, Ellen, he said quietly and left. The air outside was cool, the stars were shining above the lake. Rich walked towards his Audi. His steps were firm, but inside he felt a strange mixture relief, as if he had dropped a heavy load, and a shadow of regret, like an echo of what it could have been. He got into the car, but did not start the engine. Instead, he looked at the lake where the stars reflected and allowed himself to exhale for the first time in months. Ellen remained at the table, clutching the envelope, her tears dripping onto the paper. She knew she had lost him, not today, but months ago when she chose freedom. Rich Harper's cabin, now nearly completed, sat along the shore, its fresh paint glistening in the weak sunlight. After dinner with Ellen at the diner, where he handed her the divorce papers, Rich felt strange, not lighter, but freer, as if he had thrown off chains he had not noticed. He didn't call her, didn't check to see if she signed the papers. His lawyer, Mark, said everything was going as usual. Rich focused on the house, on the lake, on the life he was building with his own hands. But the pain of a 30-year marriage, now officially over, still smoldered like coals under the ashes. On this Saturday morning, Rich sat on the porch of the house, drinking coffee from a tin mug and looking at the water. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of an engine Claire Dawson's pickup truck. She came out, wearing her usual baseball cap and denim jacket, with a paper bag in her hand. Her blonde and gray hair spilled out from under her cap, and her face, as usual, expressed a mixture of mockery and warmth. Harper, you're sitting there again like a retired old man, she said, putting the bag on the porch. Donuts. From Marge. Eat, otherwise you will become even thinner. Rich looked at her, his eyebrows raised slightly. I'm eating, he said, his tone dry, but the corner of his mouth twitched. Well, how are you? You look, I don't know, calmer or something. He didn't want secrets, didn't want omissions. His principles, honesty, directness demanded clarity. I'm free, he said finally, his voice smooth but firm. The marriage is over. The lawyer has the documents. Claire froze, her donut stopping halfway to her mouth. She looked at him, her eyes were serious, but without pity. Damn, Harper, she said quietly. This is a big thing. Are you okay? He shrugged, his fingers tightening around his mug. I don't know what okay means, but I made a choice, and I don't regret it. She nodded, her gaze softening. You're straight as a rail. I like it. She paused, then added more quietly, so what now? Are you ready for new adventures, or are you still a hermit? Rich looked at her, his eyes meeting hers. There was a slight mockery in her tone, but behind it there was genuine interest. He knew that she felt something for him. He knew it from the festival, from her looks, from her stubborn visits. And part of him, the one that was tired of being alone, wanted to give in. But he wasn't ready. Not now. I'm in no hurry, Claire, he said, his voice soft but firm. I appreciate your help, your directness, but I need time to understand yourself. Claire smiled, her eyes sparkling. Honest answer. Rarity. She leaned back, leaning on her hands. Okay, Harper. I'm not one to push. Time is time. But now, I'm here. If you want to fish or just drink beer. Thank you, he said, and his voice was sincere. He looked at her, feeling a warmth he didn't expect. Not passion, not love, just understanding. And that was enough. Later that evening, as Rich was fixing the railing on the porch, his phone vibrated. Ethan, his son. Rich wiped his hands on his jeans and answered, preparing for a difficult conversation. Ethan rarely called, preferring to text, and his call meant something was wrong. Dad, Ethan's voice was tense, almost angry. Mia said that you and your mother are getting a divorce. This is true. Rich leaned against the railing, his gaze falling on the lake. Yes, he said simply. Documents from a lawyer. Everything is decided. What the hell, Dad? Ethan raised his voice. You have been together all my life. Why didn't you try to get her back? Why did you just give up? Rich clutched the phone, his jaw tense. He expected this, the anger, the pain, the accusations. Mia already blamed him, and now Ethan. But he was not going to make excuses. Ethan, he said, his voice calm but firm, I didn't give up. I offered your mom a chance. She chose a different life. She left, rented an apartment, and started all over again. I couldn't make her stay. But you didn't even fight for her. Ethan almost screamed. You just went to your lake, building this stupid house like you don't care. Rich closed his eyes, feeling his son's pain cutting him like a knife. I don't care, he said, his voice trembling, but he quickly pulled himself together. I loved your mother, love you and Mia, but sometimes you need to let go in order to move on with your life. I couldn't live waiting for her to come back. This is not life. Ethan was silent, only his heavy breathing could be heard. Finally, he said more quietly, I thought you two would always be together. Me too, Rich replied, his voice soft. But life changes, and we must change with it. You and Mia, you will always be my children. This house, this lake is for you too. Come whenever you want. Yeah, Ethan muttered, but his voice wasn't so angry anymore. Okay, Dad, I need to think. Think, said Rich, and call if anything happens. I'm always here. The next morning, Rich and Claire were sitting on the shore of the lake, fishing rods in their hands. The sun was just rising, turning the water golden. Claire insisted on fishing, declaring that Harper couldn't live by a lake and not catch a fish. Rich agreed, more out of curiosity than desire. Well, city guy, Claire said, casting the fishing rod with an ease that showed years of practice. If you catch a bass, I'll officially call you a local. What if not? Rich asked, his eyebrows raised, but there was a slight mockery in his voice. Then you'll wash my truck, she replied, grinning. And don't argue, I know you hate dirt. Rich laughed, not restrainedly, as usual, but heartily, loudly, so that the echo spread over the water. He himself was surprised at this sound, so alien and so correct. Claire looked at him, her eyes lighting up. Damn it, Harper, you know how to laugh, she said, jabbing him with her elbow. I thought your face was only for stern looks. I'm full of surprises, he replied, still smiling. In recent months, Rich has become part of the Winnenock community, almost without realizing it. It all started with little things. He helped Bill, an old fisherman, repair the pier, then threw boards to repair the barn where the festivals were held. His hands, accustomed to the keyboard and pen, now confidently held a hammer and saw, and his restrained manner of speaking without unnecessary words, but with action won the respect of his neighbors. They called him urban, but with warmth, as if he was already one of them. Rich was standing outside the barn on this Saturday morning, helping Sally, the local beekeeper, fix the roof before winter. The cold penetrated to the bones, but the work warmed me. Claire Dawson was there as always, carrying tiles and making fun of everyone. Harper, you move like an old man, she shouted, throwing him another sheet of tile. Move, otherwise Sally will feed you honey and you'll be stuck here forever. Rich caught the tile, his eyebrows raised. Better honey than your coffee, he answered. His voice was dry, but his eyes sparkled. He's like resin. Sally, a curvaceous woman with a loud laugh, clapped her hands. Oh, Claire, he made you. Rich, you are definitely ours now. Come for dinner, my venison is ready. We'll see, Rich said, but his tone was softer than usual. He did not seek company, but the Winnenock community, with its noisy dinners and simple conversations, became a part of his life. And Claire, with her sharp tongue and warm heart, was at the center of it. Claire stepped closer, her cheeks flushed from the cold. Seriously, Harper, you're not a city kid anymore, she said, lowering her voice. Bill said yesterday that you fish better than him. It's like an order. Rich chuckled, but couldn't help but smile. Bill drinks too much cider. I don't believe it. But in vain, she winked and returned to work, leaving him with a slight warmth in his chest. Her presence became familiar, like the lake behind the house, and Rich, although he was in no hurry, felt that their connection was growing not passionate, but deep, based on respect. By lunchtime, when the roof was finished, Rich returned to his cabin to unload the wood. He heard the sound of an engine, not Claire's pickup, but something familiar. His Audi stopped at the station and Mia, his daughter, got out. Her dark hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and her face expressed a mixture of anger and fatigue. Rich felt a pang of anxiety, but his voice remained calm. Mia, he said, placing the axe on the stump. I didn't expect it. Everything is fine. She crossed her arms, her gaze sharp. No, Dad, it's not okay. I came because Ethan said that you live here and that you are with some woman. This is true. Rich frowned, his jaw clenching. He knew the kids would react to the divorce, but Mia's accusations hit harder than he expected. Sit down, he said, pointing to the porch. Let's talk. Mia did not move, her eyes sparkled. I don't want to sit. I want to know what's going on. You divorced your mom, moved here, and now you have a new girlfriend. How could you, Dad? Rich exhaled, his hands going to his hips. He wasn't going to make excuses, but he didn't want Mia to leave with false conclusions. First of all, I don't have a girlfriend, he said, his voice firm but calm. Claire is a friend. She helps me with the house, with the community. Secondly, I didn't leave your mother. She left. I rented an apartment and started a new life. I gave her a chance to come back, but she chose something else. Mia shook her head, her voice trembling. But you didn't even fight for her. And now you're here with this Claire, and have you just forgotten us? Forgot your mom? Rich stepped closer, his eyes meeting hers. Mia, I will never forget you and Ethan. You are my children, and I haven't forgotten your mom, but I can't live in the past. I have the right to happiness, just like she does. And if Claire becomes a part of it, that's my choice. Not yours, not your mother's. My... She looked at him, her lips trembled, but she did not cry. It's not fair, Dad, she said more quietly. I just want everything to be as it was before. Me too, he replied, his voice softening. But life doesn't work like that. Sometimes you need to rebuild. This house, this place is for me. And for you, if you want. Mia was silent, then nodded, her shoulders slumping. Okay, she said. I need time. Take as much as you need, Rich said. But stay for dinner. Sally is cooking venison. You won't regret it. She smiled faintly. Let's see. That evening, Rich and Mia returned to the barn where the community had gathered for dinner. The tables were set, and there was a smell of grilled meat and apple pie. Claire, seeing Mia, came over with 2 mugs of cider. You must be Mia, she said, holding out the mug. I'm Claire. I heard you study in Connecticut. How is it there? Mia took the cider, her gaze wary but polite. Fine. Do you live here? Yeah, Claire smiled. A tackle shop, a couple of paintings, a lake. It couldn't be better. She looked at Rich, her eyes sparkling. Your dad is almost a local now. Soon Bill will be better at catching fish. Rich chuckled, but Mia relaxed slightly. Claire didn't push, didn't try to be closer, and it worked. By the end of dinner, Mia was even laughing at Bill's story about how he caught a fish the size of a boat. After dinner, Claire pulled Rich aside, holding the package in her hands. This is for you, she said, her voice quieter than usual. Open it. Rich unfolded the fabric and froze. It was a picture Lake Winnenock at sunset, water in gold and blue tones, pine trees, dark and majestic. Her job, no doubt. Claire, he said, his voice hoarse, this is incredible. Hang it in the house, she said, her smile soft. Rich looked at her. His heart sank. Without thinking, he leaned over and kissed her not passionately, but tenderly, like a confession. She replied, her hand lay on his shoulder, but then pulled away, her eyes sparkling. Don't hurry, Harper, she said, but her voice was tender. I'm not going anywhere. He nodded, holding the painting. For the first time, he felt that his connection with Claire was not just friendship, but something more. December on Lake Winanock was quiet, with frosty air that bit the cheeks and snow that covered the pine trees like delicate lace. Rich Harper's house, once a rickety barn, was now a real home, warm, with strong walls, a new stove, and a wooden floor that he sanded himself. The inside smelled of pine and coffee, and on the wall hung a painting by Claire of a lake at sunset, her gift that became the heart of this place. Rich, at 52, has found not just refuge here, but a new life. His divorce from Ellen, finalized a month ago, left him scarred but not broken. His principles, honesty, steadfastness, independence held him like an anchor, and he built a future without losing himself. On this Saturday morning, Rich stood at the stove, frying bacon, while Claire sliced bread on the kitchen table. They were preparing dinner for friends Bill, Sally, Marge, and a couple of neighbors from the Winanoka community. Their bond, which began with her stubborn visits and his discreet smiles, grew stronger over the months. It was not passion as in youth, but deep mutual respect mixed with warmth that grew slowly but surely. Claire, with her sharp tongue and warm heart, became part of his world, but Rich did not dissolve in her. He remained himself stubborn, direct, with firm boundaries. Harper, you'll burn the bacon if you stare at the frying pan like that, Claire said, her voice mocking but her eyes sparkling. She stood in jeans and a sweater, her blonde hair with gray falling over her shoulders. Or are you already dreaming about my casserole? Rich chuckled as he flipped the bacon. Your casserole. I saw you cooking. Bill will only eat it out of politeness. Oh, how brave, she poked him with her elbow, putting the bowl of salad on the table. Remind me who caught a perch smaller than mine last time. It was a bad day, he replied, his lips twitching into a smile. Give me another chance, and I'll beat you. Claire laughed. Her laughter was as loud as a bell. Dream, city boy. But seriously, she lowered her voice, her hand resting on his shoulder. This dinner, it's awesome. You belong here now, you know. Rich looked at her, feeling the warmth of her hand. Thanks to you, he said quietly, his voice sincere. You didn't let me become a hermit. Someone had to get you out, she replied with a wink and returned to the bread. By evening the house was filled with noise and laughter. Bill, with his everlasting beard, told stories about fishing, Sally poured cider for everyone, and Marge showed off her new pie recipe. The table was laden with food, roast venison, rosemary potatoes, Claire's casserole, which, to Rich's surprise, turned out to be delicious. Rich sat at the head of the table, not as a host, but as an equal, and this feeling of belonging to the community was new, but right. Rich, Bill said, raising his mug of cider, for your house. And for the fact that you didn't fall off the roof when you were fixing it. Everyone laughed, including Claire, who poked Rich in the side. Heard? You're a legend now, Harper. The legend who pays for the tiles, he answered, his tone dry, but his eyes sparkling. He raised his mug, clinking it with Bill. For all of you, for Winanock. Dinner stretched until midnight, with stories, jokes, and plans for the winter festival. When the guests left, Rich and Claire were left to clean up, their movements coordinated like those of people who know each other without words. The stove crackled, filling the house with warmth, and outside the window the snow fell quietly, covering the lake. Claire placed the last plate in the sink and turned to Rich, her eyes soft but with a slight sparkle. Okay, Harper, she said, wiping her hands on a towel. Dinner was a success. Are you satisfied? Rich looked at her, his heart sank from something warm, almost unfamiliar. Yes, he said, his voice low. Very. She stepped closer, her hand laying on his chest. "Okay," she whispered, "because I am too." He didn't think, didn't analyze. He leaned down and kissed her, slowly, deeply, feeling her warmth dissolve the remnants of his armor. She replied, her arms wrapping around his neck as they walked towards the bedroom, their steps quiet but confident. It was not a triumph, it was not a conquest, it was intimacy, honest and real. They made love. Then, lying in the dark, Claire pressed herself against his shoulder, her breath warm. "You're not that bad for an old man," she said, her voice hoarse and slightly mocking. Rich laughed, quietly but heartily. "Wait," he replied, his hand stroking her back. "I'll catch some more fish." She snorted, burying herself in his shoulder, and they fell silent, listening to the crackling of the stove. Rich looked at the ceiling, feeling her warmth next to him, and for the first time he did not think about the past. He did not lose himself in this moment, did not dissolve in Claire. He was Rich Harper, the man who had built this house, this life, and now shared it with someone who respected his boundaries. The next morning, Rich stood on the porch, holding a mug of coffee. Snow covered the lake in a thin layer, and the water was calm, like a mirror. He thought about the past, about Ellen, about their morning conversations, about the children who were now building their own lives. The pain was there, but it didn't cut like before. She became a part of him, like the scars on his arms from work. He looked at the lake, at the painting of Claire inside, at the tracks of her pickup truck in the snow, and chose the real one. Not because it was perfect, but because it was his. Claire came out of the house, wrapped in his old jacket. "It's cold, Harper," she said, clinging to him. "Let's go inside, or I'll freeze." He smiled, hugging her with one arm. "Let's go," he said, and they returned to the house, leaving the lake behind them. May 2026 on Lake Winanock was mild, with a warm wind carrying the scent of flowering grasses and pine needles. Rich Harper's house, now cozy and lived in, stood near the shore, its wooden walls absorbing the warmth of the sun. The inside smelled of coffee and fresh paint. Claire had recently refinished the window frames, adding a bright blue color that she said brought the house to life. Rich, at 53, felt in the right place. The divorce from Ellen, finalized 6 months ago, was not the end, but the beginning. He built a new life without losing himself, and his principles, honesty, resilience, independence remained his compass. On this Saturday morning, Rich sat at the old wooden table in the cabin, laptop in front of him. He was writing a letter to Mia and Ethan, his children, who rarely called now, busy with their studies and their lives. The letter was not long, but important. He wanted them to understand. "Dear Mia and Ethan, I'm not a wordsmith, you know that, but I want you to hear me. Divorcing your mother was not what I wanted, but what I had to do. Not out of anger, not out of weakness. I defended my dignity, what makes me me. Your mother needed freedom, and I gave it to her, although it cut like a knife. But I could not live in anticipation, in the penumbra of her choice. Now I am happy. Not perfect, not like in the movies, but for real. Claire is part of it, but not my whole life. I'm still your dad, still Rich. Mom is fine. We sometimes write to each other about you, about little things. She found herself in New Haven, and I'm happy for her. Life doesn't always give you a second chance, but it does give you new paths. Go your own way, but don't forget where your home is. With love, Dad." Rich reread the letter, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He wasn't sure if the kids would understand, but he knew he had to be honest. He pressed send and closed the laptop, feeling light, like after hard work. Claire walked into the house, her boots leaving trails of dirt on the floor. In her hands, she held a map and a thermos. "Harper, are you ready for an adventure?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "I found a place in Maine. Lake, fish, silence. 2 weeks, just us and fishing rods." Rich smiled, his eyebrows raised. "Maine? Are you serious? It's a 5-hour drive." "And what?" She shrugged, putting the thermos on the table. "We are not old people who sit still. Plus, I want to see how you fail at fishing in a new place." "Will you fail?" He chuckled, standing up. "I'll catch more than you, and you know it." Musk. Their relationship, which began with her stubborn visits and his reserved responses, was now strong but not perfect. They argued about how to cook a steak or whose turn it was to do the dishes, but their honesty with each other was unbreakable. Claire respected his boundaries, his independence, and he appreciated her warmth and directness. They did not dissolve into each other, and this made their connection real. Deal, Rich said, his voice soft. Maine, but I choose my music on the road. Not your Springsteen again, Claire moaned, but her smile showed that she didn't mind. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.